Hey guys, and welcome to the first of our flipped lectures that we're going to be doing for world history. This is Mrs. Omens coming to you live from my house. Woohoo! So I wanted to just let you guys know that I know you've been doing a lot of map work, and you guys might be thinking, why in the world did we, map out the continents and the different oceans, seas? Why are we looking at the prime meridian? Why are we looking at the international date line? And why did we do map work on Europe? You guys are doing all these things because I need you to have an understanding of what the world looked like. Okay, so you didn't do historical maps, you did maps of the world today, but it gives you an idea of the land masses and the size of the world and the shape of Europe and what Europe looked like. And Europe is going to become really important right now for this time period in world history. And we're going to start our world history, the history part of our history class, by talking about the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Now, you might be wondering, why are we talking about Rome? Okay, but you need to understand that Rome was huge. If you look at this picture here, you can see that this Roman Empire, at its greatest extent, when it was at its best in 117 AD, look at how far it stretched. It spanned 3 different continents. And yes, I know you guys already had this slide for your warm up, but here it is again. And now we can actually answer these questions. So, what's the name of the sea that is prominently in the middle of the empire? So, the Mediterranean Sea. If you look around here, here's Italy. Of course, Rome is right there. Here's the Mediterranean. Over here is Turkey. Here's Africa. Okay, so this is Africa. Here is the Strait of Gibraltar. This would be Spain, Portugal on the outside of here. Up here is England. Okay, so we're looking at all these different things, and you can see that it definitely, the Roman Empire was huge, and the Mediterranean was in the middle. The 3 continents were Europe, Asia, and Africa. So it spanned through 3 different continents. It was ginormous. So then this question about predict: how will the size of the empire leave it vulnerable or leave it weak? Okay, or make it, leave it weak. So we're going to talk about that, and that's what we're going to talk about as we go along here. So there were problems in the Roman Empire. The first thing, even though it had been grand and it was amazing, if you ever have seen anything on the Roman Empire, you know that, my gosh, they were just the grandest of empires, one of them anyway. But the empire grew way too large to control. They had amassed so much land that they could barely keep control of it. They couldn't guard it. They couldn't protect the land that they had. It was just too big. So what ended up happening was that barbarians, they call them barbarians because, of course, they're not civilized people, meaning that they weren't of the Roman Empire and they, just were uncivilized. Think when people came to this country, when Christopher Columbus first got here, and they called the natives that were here, they said they were uncivilized, okay? They have no religion and they have no this and they have no that. They actually did, but it just wasn't what, the Europeans wanted to see. Same thing here. Barbarians from the north, known as the Germanic tribes, continued to attack the whole Roman Empire. The male citizens were needed in the army to defend the empire. So this left all the cities and all the farms, and all the places that needed men to work a lot of these areas. There were less people for farming, and it caused a food shortage. Taxes grew higher to help pay for military defense. So people were not too happy about that. People are actually never too happy about taxes, let's be honest. And wealthy citizens began moving out of the city, creating their own estates. So that kind of sent the cities into decay, and they started kind of going downhill pretty fast. So also what ends up happening is, because the Diocletian, who was one of the emperors, because it had grown so huge. He was so afraid that it was too big. So he divided it into the Eastern and Western empires. So in the East, it was ruled by Diocletian. So the Eastern Roman Empire was ruled by Diocletian, and the Western Roman Empire was ruled by an appointed co-emperor. So power actually moves to the east. So most of the power that there is going to be in the east is going to be through Emperor Constantine. So he's very famous because he actually named the capital after himself, and it was called Constantinople. And it's kind of that thing like, now that Istanbul was Constantinople. I don't know if you guys knew that song, but you will by World War I when we get there. But Emperor Constantine made a capital in the east in what's now called Turkey. And basically it was this wonderful area of trade and power. And so some of the other areas of the empire were forgotten because of this very powerful move to the east. So there's actually 10 theories for the fall of the Roman Empire. One is excessive military spending to defend the empire. So money was going away fast because they were involved in so many wars defending these very, very huge tracts of land that they had and this huge empire. And, all these different barbarian invasions that they were having to deal with. Also, political corruption. So an interesting fact, over a 100-year span, Rome actually had 37 emperors, which is quite a big deal. But the craziest thing about it is that 25 of them were assassinated. And the other really crazy thing is many of them were assassinated at the hands of other aspiring leaders. So other people who wanted to be, the emperors were kind of like, dude, let's take that emperor out. And then we can be emperor. We can be the rulers. And that happened all the time. So there was a lot of political corruption. So, also inferior technology. Now, the Romans were great architects, okay? So many of their ideas actually came from lands that they conquered. So when the conquering stopped, when they stopped going out and trying to conquer new lands, the technology of all the new technology also stopped. And what you can see up here, these are Roman aqueducts, which actually carries fresh water to and from their different cities and the different areas where they were at. You can actually see some of these still over in Europe, over in England. Some of them still exist over there. But the whole thing is they stopped conquering lands because they feared that they were getting too big. They didn't have the money anymore. And so the new technology that they were gathering also halted. Inflation. So inflation got so bad that eventually salaries had to be paid in food and clothing, and taxes were collected in fruits and vegetables. Hello. So the cost of living was way high. Nobody had any money. They're no longer getting these new technologies. The military is just a huge drain on the economy. Okay, so tons of things going on here. Unemployment, another interesting fact. Most farmers bought slaves, which put paid workers out of jobs. At one point, the emperor was importing grain to feed over 100,000 unemployed people in Rome alone. So that's a lot. Now, the slaves came from whoever they had captured when they were in battles. So it could be any number of people from any number of backgrounds throughout all of the Roman Empire. And to say that, they're importing grain to feed these unemployed people just in Rome alone, 100,000 in Rome alone, that's a lot. Urban decay. So most people actually lived in apartments, which is kind of, you don't see that a whole lot today. I mean, people do live in apartments, but we have lots of people in houses and we have lots of people in condos or whatever else, right? But in ancient Rome, you wouldn't think it, but most of the people lived in apartments. So the poorest people actually lived at the top. Yes, me. I would have loved to have lived at the top of the apartment. I'm just saying. But anyway, people that could not pay rent were forced to live on crime-infested streets. So they were kicked out and they were forced to live out on the streets. So this was a source of then people being out there in the streets. There's no food. They don't have any place to stay. So they turn to a lot of criminal behavior. And remember, their wealthiest citizens had already moved out of the cities. So crime kind of is taking over the cities as well. So, decline in morals and values. So, here's an interesting fact. You guys can see over here the movie. This is Gladiator. Gladiator fights were enjoyed by all classes, even by the emperor. Slaves could win his or her freedom if they survived in that gladiator ring. So, at the end of each battle, fresh sand was placed on the Colosseum floor to cover the blood of the fight that had happened before. Okay, so basically, anybody who was a slave, and if you guys have ever seen the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe, he was a slave. He originally was a general in the Roman Empire, okay, in their military, but we won't talk about that right now. They're legions. But needless to say, he won his freedom, but I won't give anything away. I'll just tell you, he wins his freedom a little bit, along with some of his buddies. But you could do that if you signed on to be a gladiator or were taken as a gladiator, and you could win your freedom. The other thing here that becomes a huge deal in Rome is a rise in Christianity. So, while eventually most of Europe will become Christian, at first there were only really, really small factions that were breaking off and becoming Christian in the Roman Empire. And this created a lot of lack of unity within the empire itself, because some people were still worshiping the old gods that they had, which now are kind of like pagan gods in the eyes of the Christians. And just so you know, at this point, when we're talking about Christians in this time and place, we are talking about Catholics. The original Christians were Catholics. It's not until the 1500s that we're going to get into the Protestant Reformation, and we're going to see other sects, sects, of religions and Christianity spring up all over the place. So there were also environmental public health problems. So the aqueducts that I were talking about earlier, they were a very efficient way to carry water to homes, but in the end, water would be funneled through lead pipes. So that was kind of bad because people were getting lead poisoning. The barbarian invasions, though, were probably one of the worst things that really, really hurt Rome. Rome was finally attacked. So barbarians invade the Roman Empire from all different areas. You have Huns coming in from Central Asia and invaded from Southeastern Europe as well. Think of Attila the Hun, all right? If you've ever heard of him or seen, there was a movie made years ago called Attila, really great movie. Goths, these are Eastern tribes. And they could not defeat the Huns, and so they ran into Roman territory, and then they decided to take a hit at the Romans while they're there. And Vandals, Germanic tribe from Northern Europe, invaded Gaul, which was France, Spain, and North Africa, which of course were all parts of the Roman Empire. So these barbarians, I mean, really, everything else is problematic, but the barbarian invasions were really kind of putting a nail in that coffin of the Roman Empire. So you guys can see here all the different the different graph here is map, and it's showing you guys all of these different barbarian invasions that came into the Roman Empire. So if you look down here, it's color coded, and it just shows you where they all came in and all this stuff and what happened. So you can really see here, the Romans were being attacked from every single angle. The only place that wasn't totally being attacked at first was this area over here in the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople. But what we're talking about really, when we're talking now, is the Western Roman Empire, which is really, really mainly Europe, this area in here. This is going to become huge for us as we start to talk about the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So the empire is totally in chaos. Originally, the Romans had enough money that they paid the Goths not to attack. But when the Romans stopped paying, because of course they couldn't anymore, they couldn't even feed their own people, the Goths came in and destroyed Rome in 410 AD. So the end of the Western Empire and the end of an era. During the 400s, the Roman emperors were weak. So by 400 AD, the most powerful empire in the world became extremely weak. They feared that the empire had grown too big. As a matter of fact, they were giving away land so that they could somehow protect their empire better, but it just wouldn't work. In 476 AD, the empire collapsed at the hands of the Goths, and it left no central leadership whatsoever. So Europe at this point is going to fall into a period of chaos. As a matter of fact, this period of chaos is called the Dark Ages. The main reason is because all of this knowledge, because there was a lot of knowledge that had been collected at the Library of Alexandria, which was in Egypt, by the Roman Empire. You know, they had all this technology that they had gotten from their conquered lands. Well, once Rome is conquered, all of this goes away. All of it. All this technology and innovation, all this, these writings on scrolls and all of these things that were in Alexandria, a whole way of life that Rome had had, all of it was gone. And all you really have left are these barbarians. And so people really, they're left with no leadership. All these areas that had been conquered by the Romans, the Romans are gone. Okay. So there's no infrastructure anymore. So this comes to a period known as the Dark Ages, also known as the Middle Ages. So what's going to happen is, out of the ashes of Rome rises up a system of protection, because people needed protection. Enter the feudal era. So we're going to talk about that in our next lecture. And I know that this was kind of a long one. I hope that you enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking to you. I hope that you have a fabulous evening or day or whenever you may be watching this. And I will talk to you soon. Next stop, the Middle Ages.